Part 1 Dust Trail into Redemption Ridge, 1879. The stagecoach lurched to a stop, and Ada Miller stepped down into a cloud of red dust that immediately coated her black traveling dress. She stood there a moment, valise in one hand, the other shading her eyes against the merciless New Mexico sun. Redemption Ridge sprawled before her like a dying beast, weathered buildings huddled against the heat, their boards bleached bone-white by years of desert wind.
"This it, ma'am."
The driver spat tobacco juice into the dirt.
"End of the line."
Ada nodded, paid him the last of her fare, and watched the coach rattle away, leaving her alone on the main street. A tumbleweed rolled past with comic timing, as if the town itself was mocking her arrival. She straightened her shoulders. She'd faced worse welcomes. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, its bell tower listing slightly to the left like a drunk trying to appear sober. Next to it, a chapel showed more holes than walls, its cross hanging at an angle that suggested even God had given up on this place. Beyond them both, cattle fields stretched toward purple mountains that shimmered in the afternoon heat. Ada had barely taken 3 steps when a commotion erupted from Lark's saloon across the street. Glass shattered. A man crashed through the swinging doors and landed face first in the dust. 2 others followed, fists flying, boots kicking up miniature dust storms. "Take it back." "Hart," one of them snarled, a beefy fellow with arms like ham hocks. The man on the ground, Hart, apparently rolled aside as a boot whistled past his ear. He moved with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to violence but not eager for it. His face was weathered leather, marked by sun and wind, with a scar running from left eyebrow to jaw. Dark hair hung past his collar, and his clothes bore the dust of long rides. "Can't take back the truth, Jennings," Hart said, his voice low and steady as he got to his feet. "Your boss is watering his whiskey, and everyone knows it." Jennings swung. Hart ducked, but the second man caught him from behind. They went down in a tangle of limbs and curses that would have made a sailor blush. Ada noticed Hart wasn't fighting to win just to get free. His movements were defensive, calculated, like a man keeping something dangerous locked inside. A crowd gathered, placing bets and shouting encouragement. Nobody moved to stop it. The sheriff stood in his doorway, picking his teeth with deliberate disinterest. Ada set down her valise and marched toward the saloon. She'd be teaching these people's children tomorrow. She might as well start their education today. "Gentlemen," her teacher's voice cut through the noise like a school bell. The crowd turned, surprised. Even the fighters paused. Jennings' fist froze in mid-swing. Ada looked down at them with the same expression she'd used on unruly Boston schoolboys. "Mr. Jennings, is it, I believe, Mr. Hart has made his point about the whiskey. And Mr. Hart, you've clearly had enough of it yourself. Perhaps you should all return to your drinks, watered or otherwise, and leave the street to those of us who prefer to walk upright." Jennings's face went red. "Who the hell are you, lady?" "Ada Miller, your new schoolteacher." She let that sink in. "I'll be teaching your children starting tomorrow. I do hope they have better manners than their fathers." The crowd chuckled. Jennings released Hart and stood, brushing dust from his vest. "Ain't got no children. How fortunate for them." Ada replied sweetly. More laughter. Jennings stomped back into the saloon, his companion trailing behind. The crowd dispersed. "Show over." Hart remained on the ground, watching her with eyes the color of winter sky. "You always stick your nose in where it don't belong?" he asked. "Only when grown men behave like schoolyard bullies." She extended a hand to help him up. He looked at her hand, then at her face, something unreadable in his expression. After a moment, he took it. His palm was calloused, strong, and he was careful not to pull her off balance as he stood. "Obliged," he said simply, then walked away without looking back. "You're welcome," Ada called after him, but he was already disappearing into the stable's shadows. That was either very brave or very stupid. a woman's voice said behind her. Ada turned to find a handsome woman in her 50s, silver-streaked hair pinned up, wearing a practical dress and an amused expression. This could only be Mrs. Lark, the saloon owner Ada had corresponded with about lodging. A Mrs. Lark. The very same. And you're my new boarder, unless that display scared you off. It takes more than a little dust-up to scare a Boston schoolmarm, Mrs. Lark. The older woman's smile widened. Good. You'll need that spine. Come on, let's get you settled before the evening crowd arrives. And call me Ruby. We don't stand much on ceremony here. Ruby's boarding house sat behind the saloon, a 2-story affair that had seen better days but was clean and sturdy. Ada's room was small but private, with a window overlooking the schoolhouse. After washing off the travel dust and changing into a clean dress, she walked to inspect her new domain. The schoolhouse door hung askew on its hinges. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of late-afternoon light streaming through gaps in the walls. Broken desks lay scattered like casualties of war. The chalkboard had a crack running down its center. And something had made a nest in the corner, hopefully nothing that would object too strongly to eviction. Ada was examining a rusted lock on the teacher's desk when she noticed the scratches around it. Fresh scratches. Someone had pried it open recently. The drawer was empty except for mouse droppings and a pencil stub, but something about it bothered her. She knelt and ran her fingers along the drawer's bottom. There, a ridge. A false bottom. Poorly fitted. She pried it up with the pencil stub. Underneath lay a leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed and torn. Most entries were mundane supply orders, student attendance. But toward the back, the writing changed. Cramped notations in margins. Numbers that didn't add up. Crude drawings that looked like cattle brands. "Hellfire," she muttered, then immediately glanced around, embarrassed by her language. But she was alone with the dust and shadows. The brands were accompanied by rotes, dates, numbers. 40 head through Devil's Canyon. 15 to Juarez HB cut. The initials HB appeared frequently, always associated with large numbers. The final entry was dated 3 months ago, the day before the previous teacher had supposedly left town without a word. A floorboard creaked behind her. Ada spun, heart hammering. Sheriff Luther Pike stood in the doorway, his bulk blocking the fading light. He was a big man gone to seed, with pale eyes that never seemed to blink enough. "Miss Miller, heard you'd arrived." His gaze went to the ledger in her hands. "Finding everything in order." "Quite a mess, actually." She closed the ledger casually, as if it were nothing important. "I'll need supplies to fix this place up." "I'm sure Mr. Bell would be happy to help. He's our most prominent citizen. Owns the biggest ranch hereabouts." Pike stepped inside, boards groaning under his weight. That wouldn't be Sarah Winters's old grade book, would it? Sarah Winters. So that was the previous teacher's name. Just a ledger, mouse-chewed and worthless, I'm afraid. Ada tucked it under her arm. "I'll likely use it for kindling." Pike's eyes narrowed. "Might be town property. Better let me have a look." At kindling, Ada smiled sweetly. "Sheriff, I've been traveling for 3 days. I'm tired, dusty, and in no mood for bureaucracy, unless you have a warrant for this mouse-eaten trash. I'll bid you good evening." His face darkened. "You should know, Miss Miller, that we do things different out here. This ain't Boston. Young lady alone needs friends, not enemies. How fortunate, then, that I'm neither young nor in need of friends." She moved toward the door, forcing him to step aside or physically block her. After a tense moment, he moved. Mister, Bell will be calling tomorrow," Pike said to her back. "He likes to meet all the new civic editions." Ada kept walking, the ledger tight under her arm. Only when she was back in her room with the door locked did she allow her hands to shake. She lit the oil lamp and studied the ledger more carefully. The patterns became clearer. Cattle were moving through the territory in numbers that didn't match any official records. And always, those initials H.B., Horace Bell. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She quickly hid the ledger under her mattress before answering. Ruby Lark stood in the hallway with a tray. "Thought you might prefer eating up here tonight. That was quite an entrance you made." Ada accepted the tray gratefully. Salt pork, beans, cornbread, and coffee not fancy, but hot and filling. "That man in the fight," Ada said carefully. "Hart, what can you tell me about him?" Ruby's eyes sharpened. "Eli Hart, been here about 2 years. Keeps to himself, works cattle, doesn't cause trouble unless trouble finds him first. Good with horses, better with a gun, though he rarely draws it anymore." "Anymore?" "Some say he used to work for the big detective agencies back east. Others say he was a bounty hunter. All I know is he pays his bills and treats my girls decent." Ruby paused. "Why he catch your fancy?" "Certainly not," Ada said too quickly. "I just prefer to know who I'm living among." Ruby smiled knowingly. "Word of advice, Luther Pike and Horace Bell run this town like their personal kingdom. The previous teacher asked too many questions. Then one day, she was gone. Her things still in her room. Coffee still warm on her desk." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying sometimes it's better to teach reading and writing and leave the arithmetic alone, especially when the numbers don't add up." Ruby headed for the door, then paused. "But something tells me you're not the type to leave well enough alone. Just be careful. This territory has a way of swallowing people who dig too deep." After Ruby left, Ada retrieved the ledger and studied it by lamplight until her eyes burned. The entries painted a picture of systematic theft, cattle diverted, brands altered, profits skimmed. And at the center of it all, those initials that almost certainly stood for Horace Bell. Tomorrow she'd meet her students, begin the work she'd come here to do. But tonight, she held evidence of something darker than dust and broken desks. The previous teacher had discovered this secret and vanished. Now it was Ada's turn to decide what to do with dangerous knowledge in a town where the law itself might be the greatest threat. Outside her window, a coyote howled in the distance. The sound raised goosebumps on her arms. Primitive and warning. She closed the ledger and hid it again, then prepared for bed. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. For tonight, she'd made an enemy of the sheriff, a mystery of a cowboy, and inherited a secret that might have killed the last person who held it. "Welcome to Redemption Ridge," she thought wryly, "where the dust never settles and neither, apparently, do the secrets." As she blew out the lamp, she wondered if Eli Hart's scarred face and careful movements held their own secrets. Something about the way he'd fought defensive, controlled, spoke of a man keeping himself in check. She'd seen that kind of restraint before, in soldiers returning from war, men who'd learned that their capacity for violence was something to be carefully managed, not casually displayed. She pushed the thought away. She had enough mysteries without adding a taciturn cowboy to the list, but as sleep finally claimed her, she dreamed of winter sky eyes and hands that were gentle despite their strength. Part 2, Black Thread in the Ledger. Ada woke before dawn, the desert cold seeping through thin walls. She dressed quickly, pinning her dark hair into its usual severe bun, and wrapped her shawl tight against the morning chill. The ledger seemed to pulse beneath her mattress like a guilty conscience. She'd spent half the night memorizing its contents, and the other half wondering if she was a fool for getting involved. The schoolhouse looked even worse in the harsh morning light. She arrived to find 3 Mexican women already there, scrubbing floors with lye soap and determination. They looked up nervously as she entered. "Buenos dias," Ada said, exhausting nearly half her Spanish vocabulary. "I'm Miss Miller." The oldest woman, her face a map of sun-carved lines, straightened slowly. "Senora Delgado, these are my daughters, Rosa and Carmen. We clean for the school sometimes. When there is school." "How long since there were regular classes?" 3 months," Since Senorita Winters. Senora Delgado crossed herself. She was kind, taught our children same as the others. Ada filed that away. Sarah Winters had apparently upset more than just the cattle thieves. Would you like to continue? I could use the help. And I can pay. No money, Senora Delgado said firmly. You teach our children to read. We help with the school. As justo is fair. By the time the sun climbed high enough to bake the shadows away, they'd made remarkable progress. The worst of the debris was cleared, desks arranged in rough rows, and the windows cleaned enough to let in proper light. Ada was sweeping when she heard boots on the porch. Eli Hart stood in the doorway, hat in hand, a toolbox at his feet, in daylight. She could see details the saloon dust had hidden premature silver threading through his dark hair. Laugh lines that suggested he'd once smiled more often. Hands that were gentle on his hat brim despite their obvious strength. Hey, Mrs. Lark mentioned you might need help with repairs, he said. And you just happened to be free on a Tuesday morning. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Cattle don't need much tending when they're grazing. Mind if I look at that door? She stepped aside. He worked in silence, competent and focused. Ada tried to concentrate on her sweeping, but found herself watching his hands, the careful way he aligned the hinges, the practiced movements that spoke of a man who fixed what was broken without fuss or complaint. You're not from around here, she said eventually. Neither are you. He didn't look up from his work. Boston. And you? Pennsylvania, originally. Been a while since I called any place home, though. And what brought you to Redemption Ridge? His hands stilled for a moment. Same thing that brings most folks to the edge of nowhere, running from something or towards something. He resumed working. Which are you? Perhaps both, she admitted, surprising herself with the honesty, though I prefer to think of it as a fresh start. Starts aren't always fresh. Sometimes the old dirt follows you. Before she could respond, children began arriving. A handful at first, then more. Pushed through the door by curious parents who wanted a look at the new teacher. By 9 o'clock, she had 15 students ranging from 6 to 16. White and Mexican mixed together in a way that would have scandalized Boston society. Good morning, class, Ada began, then stopped. Sheriff Pike had entered. Horace Bell beside him. Bell was everything Pike wasn't, lean where Pike was bulky, elegant where Pike was crude. His suit was too fine for the territory, his boots polished to a mirror shine. He had the kind of face that got called distinguished in society pages and dangerous in gossip circles. Miss Miller, Bell smiled. Teeth white as tombstones. Forgive the interruption. I merely wanted to welcome you properly to our community. Mr. Bell, she kept her voice neutral. How kind. As you can see, we're about to begin lessons. Of course, education is so important. His gaze swept the room, pausing on the Mexican children. Though I do hope you'll maintain appropriate standards. Some of my fellow ranchers worry about mixing different elements. The only elements I'm concerned with are hydrogen and oxygen. Mr. Bell. Science makes no distinction between rich and poor, white and brown. His smile tightened. How modern. I also wanted to mention that I'd be happy to provide funds for school improvements, books, supplies, perhaps even a salary increase. The town council of which I'm chairman values education highly. The bribe was silk smooth, barely a bribe at all. Just a generous citizen supporting civic improvement. Ada glanced at Eli, who had gone very still by the door, pretending to focus on his tools. How generous, Ada said. I'll be sure to submit a list of needed supplies through proper channels. Now, if you'll excuse us, education waits for no one. Bell's eyes hardened, but his smile remained. Of course. Oh, I heard you found some old papers yesterday. Town property. I believe we really should catalog such things properly. Just mouse-eaten trash, as I told the sheriff. Nothing worth cataloging. Still, procedures must be followed. Perhaps you could bring them by my office later. I'm afraid they've already served their highest purpose starting this morning's fire. She gestured to the cold stove, which indeed had ashes from burned paper, though it was only old newspapers she'd used. Something dangerous flashed in Belle's eyes. Pike's hand moved unconsciously toward his gun. The children sat frozen, sensing adult tensions they couldn't understand. "What a shame," Belle said softly. "Historical documents lost forever. Well, I won't keep you from your noble work. Good day, Miss Miller. Children." After they left, the air seemed to breathe again. Ada's hands trembled slightly as she opened McGuffey's reader. Behind her, she heard Eli's quiet voice. "That was either very brave or very stupid. You said that yesterday." Bears repeating. He gathered his tools. "I'll come back later to finish the repairs, when there are fewer interruptions." He left, and Ada focused on her students, pushing away thoughts of ledgers and cattle brands and men with tombstone smiles. But as the morning wore on, she noticed things. How the older Mexican boys kept glancing at the windows. How little Mary Pike, the sheriff's daughter, flinched when her father's name was mentioned. How the children from the ranches whispered about missing cattle and fathers who came home with unexplained injuries. At lunch, she dismissed the class and walked to the edge of town, where scrub brush gave way to desert. She needed air, space to think. The ledger was hidden in her room, but its contents burned in her memory. 40 head here, 15 there, routes through Devil's Canyon, Skeleton Ridge, Black Draw, and always those initials H.B. You shouldn't wander alone. She didn't jump a point of pride, though Eli's sudden appearance set her heart racing. He moved like a shadow, this man who fixed doors and kept secrets. "I'm hardly a delicate flower, Mr. Hart." "Didn't say you were, but flowers aren't what disappears in this territory." He stood beside her, gaze on the horizon. "You didn't burn that ledger." It wasn't a question. "What makes you think—" "Same thing that makes me think you're smart enough to know what those brands mean." He pulled a folded paper from his vest. "Found this nailed to a fence post this morning. Thought you should see it." She unfolded it, a crude drawing of a schoolhouse with a red X through it. Below, in block letters, "Some lessons shouldn't be taught." "Charming," she said, proud when her voice didn't shake. "The spelling's atrocious. Perhaps they need my services more than they think." He almost smiled. "You're not going to leave, are you?" "Would you?" "I'm not a schoolteacher." "No." She studied his profile. "What are you, exactly?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Used to work for Pinkerton. Trackmen who didn't want tracking. Good at it, too, until a job went bad in Colorado. Friends died because I was so focused on being clever I didn't see the ambush coming." He pulled makings from his pocket, rolled a cigarette with practiced movements. "Swore I'd never carry a badge or hunt men again. Came here to work cattle and forget." "But you haven't forgotten." "No." He lit the cigarette, smoke curling in the still air. "And now there's a schoolteacher stirring up the same dirt that got Sarah Winters killed, and I'm wondering if my oath is worth another woman's life." The word "killed" hung between them like a hanged man. "You think she's dead?" "I know she is. Found her horse in Devil's Canyon 2 months back, saddle still on, reins tangled in mesquite. No body coyotes and vultures saw to that, but her saddlebags were there. Had a letter to her sister, half finished, talking about evidence she'd found." He took a long drag. "Never could prove anything?" Pike said she probably fell, got dragged. Accidents happen. Ada's mouth went dry. "And you believe that?" "I believe Sarah Winters was murdered for knowing what you now know. I believe Belle's been stealing cattle for years, altering brands, selling to buyers who don't ask questions. I believe Pike takes his cut and keeps folks quiet. And I believe you're about 3 questions away from joining Sarah in whatever canyon they choose for you." She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt oddly calm. Then help me. You have skills, knowledge. Together we could— No, he dropped the cigarette, ground it under his boot. I'm done with that life. Done with clever plans that get people killed. He turned to face her fully. Burn that ledger. Teach your students. Keep your head down. Please. The please did something to her chest, made it tight and warm. I can't. You know I can't. Those children deserve better than a town run by thieves and murderers. Those children deserve a teacher who lives to see Christmas. His hand rose as if to touch her face, then dropped. You have no idea what these men are capable of. Then show me. She met his eyes steadily. If you won't help for justice, help to keep me alive. Teach me what I need to know to survive this. He studied her for a long moment, and she wondered what he saw. A foolish Eastern woman playing at frontier justice, or something else. Something that made his jaw tighten and his eyes darken with an emotion she couldn't name. Burn the ledger, he said again. But she heard the defeat in it. He knew she wouldn't, just as she knew he wouldn't truly walk away. Some people were built to stand aside, and some weren't. They both knew which kind they were. That night, she sat in a room transcribing the ledger by lamplight. Every entry, every brand, every suspicious notation. If they took the original, she'd have a copy. If they took that, she'd have it memorized. Sarah Winters had died for this information. The least Ada could do was ensure her death meant something. A pebble struck her window. She looked out to see Eli in the shadows below. Trouble, he said quietly when she raised the sash. Pike's deputy is heading this way. Hide whatever needs hiding. She grabbed both ledgers, looked frantically around the small room. Under the mattress was too obvious. The wardrobe too easily searched. Finally! She lifted a loose floorboard and shoved them underneath, replacing the board just as boots sounded on the stairs. The knock was perfunctory. Deputy Reyes entered before she could respond, his smile apologetic and false. He was young, handsome in a weak-chinned way, with nervous hands that couldn't quite settle. Sorry to disturb you, Miss Miller. Sheriff asked me to check on that suspicious person seen near the boarding house. For your safety. How thoughtful. She remained seated at her small table, the picture of calm despite her racing heart. Though I've seen no one suspicious, unless you count yourself, Deputy. He laughed awkwardly, but his eyes swept the room. Just doing my job. Ma'am, you sure you didn't keep any of those old papers from the school mister? Bell's quite concerned about preserving town history. As I told him, they've been burned. Would you like to sift through my stove ashes? No. But he moved to the wardrobe, opened it with casual rudeness. Nice dresses, Boston fashions. Deputy Reyes, are you searching my room or admiring my wardrobe? He flushed, just being thorough. He moved toward the bed. That's quite thorough enough. Ada stood, steel in her voice. Unless you have a warrant, I'll ask you to leave. Now. For a moment, something ugly crossed his features. Then the apologetic mask returned. Of course, my apologies. Sleep well. Miss Miller? At the door. He paused. Oh, word of advice, that drifter Hart's no good. Folks say he killed a woman back in Colorado. Wouldn't want you keeping the wrong company. After he left, Ada stood shaking in the middle of her violated room. They were escalating quickly, from warnings to searches. How long before they stopped pretending about warrants and procedures? She looked out the window. Eli was gone, vanished back into the shadows he seemed to inhabit so comfortably. A man who'd killed. She thought of his careful hands fixing her door, the pain in his voice when he spoke of Colorado. Whatever had happened there, she'd stake her life he was no murderer of women. In fact, she realized with a chill, she might be doing exactly that, staking her life on a scarred stranger who moved through darkness like he was born to it. But what choice did she have? The children needed her. The town needed someone to stand up, and somewhere in Devil's Canyon, Sarah Winters's bones needed justice. She retrieved the ledgers, wrapped them in oilcloth, and considered her options. Tomorrow she'd need a better hiding place. Tomorrow she'd need allies. Tomorrow she'd need to decide how far she was willing to go for truth in a town built on lies. Tonight, she'd transcribe more entries and try not to think about winter sky eyes and warnings delivered through darkness. Try not to wonder what kind of man swore off violence but still watched over near strangers in the night. The lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, something howled coyote or wind. She couldn't tell. Either way, it sounded like morning. Part 3, Rope and Reckoning. The storm hit Redemption Ridge just after midnight, unseasonable and fierce. Thunder rolled across the desert like artillery fire, and lightning turned the world into a series of stark photographs. Light, dark, light, dark. Ada lay awake listening to the rain pound her window, thinking about hidden ledgers and stolen cattle. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the air clean and sharp. She arrived at school to find chaos. 40 head of Horace Bell's prime cattle had vanished in the night, and half the town was in uproar. Just disappeared, Tom Morrison, one of Bell's ranch hands, was telling anyone who'd listen. Checked on him before the storm. All there. This morning gone. Not a trace. Ada kept her expression neutral as she prepared for class. But her mind raced. Someone had used the storm as cover for a massive theft. The question was who was stealing from whom. The children were distracted, whispering about the missing cattle and their father's reactions. Ada let them talk for a few minutes. Sometimes the best education came from understanding the world around them. Miss Miller. Young Ben Avery raised his hand. Pa says them Mexicans from the camps probably took Mr. Bell's cattle. Says Sheriff Pike's gonna round 'em up. Does your father have evidence of this? Ben? The boy looked confused. Evidence. Proof, facts, things we can see and verify. Not just assume. Well, they're poor, ain't they? And they don't like Mr. Bell much. Ada moved to the chalkboard. Class, let's discuss the difference between suspicion and evidence. Can anyone give me an example of evidence? Maria Delgado, one of her brightest students, raised her hand tentatively. Tracks if someone stole cattle. There would be tracks. Excellent. What else? Brands, said Jake Morrison, Tom's boy. Stolen cattle still got brands, less they're changed. Very good. So if we were investigators, what would we look for? The discussion continued, but Ada's attention was drawn to the window. Eli Hart rode past, and even from a distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders. He glanced toward the schoolhouse. Their eyes met for an instant. Then he was gone. After dismissing class for lunch, Ada walked toward the edge of town where the theft had occurred. She wasn't the only curious citizen. A crowd had gathered near Bell's East Pasture, where Sheriff Pike was examining the ground with theatrical concentration. Clear as day. Pike announced, "Tracks head straight toward the Mexican camp. Probably drove him toward the border soon as the rain started." Ada studied the muddy ground. The tracks were indeed too clear. Even she could see they'd been made after the rain stopped. Not during... The depth was wrong. The edges too sharp. These cattle had been moved recently, perhaps at dawn. "Interesting theory, Sheriff," she said mildly. Pike's face darkened. "This is a crime scene, Miss Miller. No place for school teachers." "Of course. I was just curious about the forensic process. We've been studying logic and evidence in class." "That's so." Bell appeared at her elbow, smooth as silk. "And what does your logic tell you about these tracks?" She met his gaze steadily. "That assumptions without investigation lead to injustice." "How philosophical. Yet sometimes the obvious answer is the correct one." He gestured toward the Mexican camp. "Desperate people do desperate things." "As do greedy ones," she replied quietly. The crowd went silent. Bell's smile never wavered, but his eyes went cold as winter. "Are you suggesting something, Miss Miller?" "Only that thorough investigation benefits everyone. After all, if the cattle were stolen by locals, they can't have gone far. The brands would give them away at any market." "Unless they were altered," someone muttered. Bell turned sharply. "Who said that?" No one answered, but Ada noticed several ranchers exchanging glances. She wasn't the only one who'd noticed discrepancies in cattle counts lately. "I'll handle this investigation," Pike said loudly. "Everyone go about your business. Justice will be done." The crowd dispersed slowly. Ada lingered, pretending to adjust her bootlace while studying the tracks more carefully. There, a boot print partially obscured by a hoof mark. The boot was large, with a distinctive worn spot on the heel. She'd seen that print before, pressed into the schoolhouse floor after Deputy Reyes's visit. "You see it too." She straightened to find Eli beside her, speaking low. "The tracks were made after the storm," she said quietly. "Around dawn, probably right before they discovered the theft." He knelt, fingers hovering over another print. "This one's interesting. See the nail pattern? That's a factory shoe. Not local work. Expensive." "Bell's or Pike's, they both favor imported goods." He stood, dusting his hands. "They're framing the camp, using their own stolen cattle to do it. But why if they're the ones stealing cattle? Perfect cover. Blame the Mexicans. Confiscate their property as compensation. Drive them out. Bell gets their water rights, and any future theft gets blamed on remnants of the gang." Ada felt sick. "We have to stop them." "With what are suspicions?" Eli shook his head. "Pike's probably riding to the camp now with a posse. By nightfall, there'll be arrests. Maybe worse." "Then we find where they really took the cattle?" She grabbed his arm. "You know this country. Where would you hide 40 head? He looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face. "You don't give up, do you?" "Sarah Winters gave up. Look where it got her." His jaw tightened. "There are box canyons north of here. Good water, hidden pastures. But if we're caught, then we'd better not get caught." They saddled horses quietly, Ada changing into a split skirt she'd brought from Boston, scandalous by local standards but practical for hard riding. Eli led them north, away from town and into broken country where red rocks rose like ancient castles. "Stay close," he warned. "This country's full of holes and false trails. Easy to get lost." They rode for an hour, the sun beating down mercilessly. Ada had thought herself a decent rider, but keeping up with Eli taxed every skill she had. He moved like part of his horse, reading the landscape with an ease that spoke of years in the saddle. "There." He pointed to a smudge against the rocks. "Dust. Something's moving in Skeleton Canyon." They dismounted, approaching on foot. The canyon mouth was narrow, easily defended, but Eli knew a game trail that led to an overlook. They crawled the last few yards, peering down into a hidden valley. 40 head of cattle milled in a makeshift corral. 3 men lounged in the shade, none of them Mexican. Ada recognized 2 as Bell's employees. The third was Deputy Reyes. "Writing down the altered brands," Eli whispered, watching Reyes work with a running iron. "They'll drive them out tonight, sell them in Mexico as recovered stock. Bell gets paid twice insurance here, sale there." Ada memorized everything: the men's faces, the altered brands, the canyon's location. Evidence, real evidence. They were backing away when a stone shifted under her foot, clattering down the slope. The men below jumped to their feet. What was that? Probably a sheep. Check it out. Hank. Eli pulled Ada behind a boulder as footsteps climbed toward them. Her heart hammered so loud she was certain it would give them away. Eli's hand moved to his gun, then away. That same controlled restraint she'd seen before. The man called Hank appeared 20 feet away, scanning the rocks. If he came closer... A roadrunner burst from the brush, racing across the rocks with its peculiar gait. Hank laughed. Just a damn bird, he called down. Scared me good, though. They waited, frozen, until he descended. Then Eli led her back to the horses by a different route, moving with agonizing care. Only when they were a mile away did Ada allow herself to breathe properly. We did it, she said. We have evidence. We have knowledge. Eli corrected. Evidence would be bringing Pike here, which won't happen. Our word against theirs, and we're trespassing besides. Then what do we do? He was quiet for a moment, and she saw him wrestling with something, that oath he'd mentioned. Perhaps the promise to never play detective again. There's a federal marshal in Las Cruces, he said finally. Sam Cray, honest man, or was 3 years ago. If we could get word to him. How long would that take? Week, maybe 2, too long to save the camp. He looked at her. Unless what? Unless we make Bell nervous enough to make a mistake. Spook him into moving too fast, too careless. A ghost of his old skills showing through. But it's dangerous. Once they know we're onto them. They already suspect. That search last night wasn't random. Suspicion and proof are different things. Cross that line, and they'll stop playing nice. Ada thought of her students, of Maria Delgado's bright mind and Ben Avery's curiosity, of a town poisoned by corruption and a woman who died for trying to cure it. I've already crossed it, she said. The question is, are you with me? He looked at her for a long moment, this scarred man with gentle hands and a violent past. She saw the moment he decided, saw something shift in those winter sky eyes. God help me, he said quietly. Yes. They rode back as the sun touched the horizon, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold. Neither spoke, but Ada felt something had changed between them. A partnership forged. Perhaps... or something deeper. Something that had nothing to do with stolen cattle and everything to do with the way he'd shielded her body with his behind that boulder. As they neared town, they saw smoke rising. Too much smoke. They spurred their horses, racing toward what Ada already knew in her gut they'd find. The Mexican camp was burning. Women ran with buckets while men beat at flames with blankets. Pike's posse stood watching, rifles ready, preventing anyone from fleeing. Several men knelt in the dirt, hands bound rounded up as suspected rustlers. No! Ada leaped from her horse, rushing toward the flames. A small child stood frozen near a burning tent, and she scooped him up, running clear as the canvas collapsed in a shower of sparks. Maria, Senora Delgado was screaming, "Mihia!" Ada thrust the child at another woman and plunged back toward the flames. She could hear Maria coughing, trapped behind a wall of fire. The heat was incredible, searing her lungs, but she dropped to her belly and crawled under the smoke. There Maria huddled beneath an overturned cart. Ada grabbed her, started backing out, but burning debris blocked their path. The smoke was too thick, her lungs screaming for air. Strong hands seized her ankles, dragging her backward. Eli pulled them both clear as the rest of the structure collapsed. Maria clung to her, coughing and crying, while Eli checked them both for burns. "Fool woman," he muttered, but his hands were impossibly gentle as he brushed ash from her face. "Well, well." Pike loomed over them. "Miss Miller, funny finding you here. Almost like you knew something was going to happen." I saw the smoke. After a long ride north, looks like." He noted their dust-covered clothes, the sweat on their horses. "Find anything interesting out there?" Belle appeared, immaculate despite the chaos. Miss Miller does seem to turn up in the strangest places. First she's defending drunks, then asking about cattle tracks, now riding with a known killer. He smiled at Eli. "Oh yes, Mr. Hart, we know all about Colorado." Eli went very still. That dangerous stillness Ada was learning to recognize. Ancient history, Eli said quietly. Is it a woman died because of you? Seems you have a habit of getting women in trouble. Belle's gaze shifted to Ada. I'd hate to see history repeat itself. That's enough. Ada stood, Maria still clinging to her skirts. These people need help, not accusations. Where's your Christian charity? With law-abiding citizens, Pike said. Not cattle thieves. You have no proof. We have all we need. He gestured to his men. Load the prisoners. They'll stand trial in the morning. A trial requires evidence. Sheriff, due process. Or have we abandoned law entirely? Pike's face went purple. You're walking a thin line. Schoolteacher. Keep talking, and you'll find yourself charged with aiding and abetting. Then charge me, Ada said clearly. I'd welcome the chance to speak in court about what constitutes real evidence versus manufactured. Pike's hand went to his gun. Eli stepped forward, placing himself between them. Sheriff, Belle said smoothly. No need for unpleasantness. Miss Miller is overwrought. The smoke, the excitement. Perhaps Mr. Hart could escort her home. It wasn't a request. Eli took Ada's arm, his grip gentle but firm. Come on, you've done what you can here. She wanted to protest, to stand and fight, but Maria was shaking against her and the camp was still burning. Sometimes retreat was necessary to fight another day. As Eli led her away, Belle called after them. Oh, Miss Miller's school's canceled tomorrow. The building is needed for the trial. I'm sure you understand. She looked back at him, at his satisfied smile and Pike's thuggish grin, at the Mexican families watching their homes burn while their men sat bound in the dirt. I understand perfectly. Mr. Bell, she said. Better than you know. They rode back to town in silence, Maria riding in front of Ada, slowly stopping her shaking. At the boarding house, Senora Delgado was waiting, tears streaming as she clutched her daughter. Gracias, she whispered to Ada. Gracias, maestra. After they left, Ada stood in the street, watching the glow of the still-burning camp paint the sky orange. Her dress was ruined, her hands blistered, her lungs raw from smoke. You saved that girl, Eli said quietly. While they destroyed everything else. Anger and frustration choked her. We saw the real thieves, found the cattle, and it doesn't matter. They'll hang innocent men tomorrow, and there's nothing. Yes, there is. His voice was different now, harder. The voice of a man who'd made a decision. You asked if I was with you. I am. All the way. She looked at him, this complex man with his scars and secrets. What changed? You did, running into fire for a child, standing up to Pike knowing he'd as soon shoot you as listen. He touched her face gently, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't known was there. Sarah Winters was my friend. I let her down. Let my oath keep me from helping until it was too late. I won't make that mistake again. What are you saying? I'm saying tomorrow's trial isn't the end. It's the beginning. His eyes held hers. Bell wants to play rough fine, but he has no idea what rough really looks like. I spent 5 years tracking killers and thieves across this territory. Time to remember those skills. Your oath. My oath was about hunting men for money. This is different. This is justice. He stepped back. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be hard, but tomorrow night, we start fighting back. He disappeared into the darkness, leaving Ada alone with her blistered hands and racing heart. The fire in the camp was dying now, reduced to glowing embers that pulsed like angry stars. Tomorrow, Pike would run his sham trial. Tomorrow, innocent men might hang. But tomorrow night, if Eli was true to his word, the real war for Redemption Ridge would begin. She climbed the stairs to her room, already planning. The ledger was still hidden, still valuable. She had the location of the stolen cattle. She had an ally who knew the territory and the tactics needed to fight men like Bell. Most importantly, she had the trust of the community, the real community, not Bell's bought men. The Delgados and others would remember who ran toward the fire and who stood back watching it burn. In her room, she carefully treated her burns, changed her ruined dress, and sat down to write. If they were going to fight, they'd need help. Federal marshals, honest newspaper men, anyone who might listen. Outside her window, a coyote howled that same mournful sound that had haunted her first nights here. But tonight, it didn't sound like mourning. Tonight, it sounded like war. Part 4, Sandstorm at Blackwell. The trial was a mockery. Pike had transformed the schoolhouse into a courtroom, with Bell presiding as judge and a jury of his ranch hands delivering verdicts before evidence was heard. 3 men from the Mexican camp sat shackled, their faces resigned to injustice. Ada watched from the back, her students clustered around her. She'd insisted on bringing them if her classroom was to be used for this charade. They might as well learn what corruption looked like firsthand. Guilty, the foreman announced after 5 minutes of deliberation. Sentence to be carried out at sunset, Bell intoned. This court is adjourned. The crowd filed out slowly. Some looked satisfied, others troubled. Ada caught fragments of conversation, doubts about the evidence, whispers about Bell's convenient loss and recovery of cattle before. The seeds of suspicion were already there, waiting to grow.
Miss Miller.
Eli appeared at her elbow.
We need to go. Now.
Something in his tone made her gather the children quickly, dismissing them to their homes. She followed Eli outside, where his horse stood next to a spare mount. What's happening? Storm coming, big one. Can you feel it? She could a heaviness in the air, an electric tension that made her skin prickle. The western horizon showed a brown smudge that seemed to eat the sky. Sandstorm, Eli confirmed. Hours away, maybe less, but that's not why we're leaving. He handed her a canteen and saddlebags. Last night, I sent word to some old friends. They've been watching Bell's operation at the border, the cattle from yesterday. They're moving them today, during the storm. But the execution is designed to keep everyone in town while they complete the sale. His face was grim. We can't save those men, not today, but we can get evidence that might save the next ones. Ada looked back at the schoolhouse, where 3 innocent men waited to die. Then at the approaching storm. Every instinct screamed to stay, to fight, to stand between the condemned and their fate. But Eli was right. Emotional gestures wouldn't save anyone. Evidence might. They rode hard toward Blackwell, an abandoned water stop halfway to the border. The wind picked up, driving grit into their faces. Ada pulled her bandana up. Squinting against the assault, the landscape blurred, familiar landmarks vanishing in the growing haze.
Stay close,
Eli shouted over the wind. If we get separated. The storm hit like a physical blow. One moment they could see 50 yards, the next, nothing but a wall of stinging sand. The horses balked, trying to turn their backs to the wind. Ada lost sight of Eli, could barely see her own horse's ears. Eli! The wind tore her voice away. A hand grabbed her reins. Eli pulled her horse close to his, their knees touching. He pointed to a dark shape in the murk rocks, perhaps a shallow cave. They fought toward it as the storm intensified, sand finding every gap in their clothing, filling their mouths and noses. The cave was barely more than an overhang, but it blocked the worst of the wind. They crowded the horses in, then pressed themselves against the back wall. Sand swirled at the entrance like a living thing, trying to claw its way inside. This is insane, Ada shouted, spitting grit. Welcome to New Mexico, Eli replied, pulling off his bandana to shake it out. They were pressed close in the narrow space, and Ada became acutely aware of his warmth, the solid presence of him in the chaos. Her heart was racing, but not entirely from fear of the storm. How long, she asked. Hours, maybe all night. He looked at her, concern creasing his brow. You all right? I'm fine. But she was shaking, reaction setting in from the trial, the ride, the violence of the storm. Everything she'd tried to hold together for days was unraveling. Ada, his voice was gentle. You don't have to be strong all the time. Yes, I do. The words came out harsher than intended. People depend on me. My students, their families. I can't afford weakness. Being human isn't weakness. It is where I come from. She laughed bitterly. You want to know why I really left Boston? My ex-husband, was a respected banker, pillar of the community, also a drunk who spent his nights in gaming halls and brothels. When I finally had enough and filed for divorce, he told everyone I was hysterical, delusional, unfit to teach impressionable children. Eli said nothing, just watched her with those winter eyes. The school board believed him, of course. Why wouldn't they? He was Marcus Thornfield of the Beacon Hill Thornfields. I was nobody, just a woman who'd forgotten her place. She pulled her knees up, making herself smaller. They let me resign quietly, promised references if I left the state. So I came west, where I thought I could start over, be someone who mattered. You do matter. Do I 3 men are going to die today because I couldn't, because evil men made evil choices, not because you failed. He shifted closer. You saved Maria Delgado. You're teaching children who'd never have a chance otherwise. You're standing up to men who've terrorized this town for years. How does that not matter? She looked at him through the dim light. Sometimes I feel like I'm just shadowboxing, going through motions of strength without really having any. Like everyone can see, I'm just playing at being brave. Ada, he reached out, hesitated, then gently touched her face. I have known truly brave people, faced them, fought beside them, watched them die. You're not playing at anything. The intimacy of the moment, the storm raging outside. His hand warm against her cheek overwhelmed her careful defenses. She'd spent so long being strong, being proud, being untouchable, but here in this cave with sand and wind trying to tear the world apart. She didn't want to be untouchable anymore. I'm frightened, she admitted, the words barely audible. Of Belle, of Pike, of failing like Sarah did, of... She met his eyes. Of feeling things I shouldn't feel. His thumb traced her cheekbone, gentle as a whisper. What things? Instead of answering with words, she reached up and began unbuttoning his coat, her fingers steady despite her racing heart. He went very still. Ada, I'm tired of being too proud to ask for what I need. She undid his belt with deliberate calm, then looked up at him. Vulnerable but unashamed. I'm too proud to beg, so I'll just undo your belt and say, make me feel worthy. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. She wasn't asking for rescue or protection. She was asking to be seen, to be touched, to be reminded that beneath the schoolteacher's armor was a woman who deserved to feel valuable, desired, alive. Eli studied her face for a long moment. And she saw him understand. This wasn't about the storm, or the danger, or even the attraction that had sparked between them from that first day. This was about 2 damaged people choosing each other in a moment outside of time. You are worthy, he said quietly, more than worthy. He kissed her then, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. The storm howled outside, but here in their small shelter, there was only warmth and connection. His hands were careful, respectful, waiting for her lead. She'd been the one to start this, and he let her control how far it went. Time blurred. The touch of his hands, the heat of his mouth, the solid strength of him, all of it grounded her in a way she'd never experienced. This wasn't the fumbling of her marriage bed or the coercive attempts of men who thought a divorced woman was fair game. This was chosen, mutual. Healing in its tenderness. When the storm finally began to weaken, they lay entwined, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Neither spoke words would have broken the spell, but as gray light filtered in, reality returned. "The cattle," Ada said, sitting up and straightening her disheveled clothing, "will be long gone." Eli buttoned his shirt, businesslike now, but his eyes remained soft when they met hers. "But there's something else. During sandstorms, people leave things behind, get careless." They emerged from the cave into a world transformed. Sand dunes had shifted, creating new landscapes. Their horses stood patient, coated in dust but unharmed. As they mounted, Eli pointed to fresh tracks leading south. "Heavy wagons. Recent." He studied the marks. "They stopped here, maybe to wait out the worst of it." They followed the tracks to Blackwell, where the old stone structure stood partially buried in new sand. Evidence of a hasty camp littered the area: food tins, whiskey bottles, and there, partially buried, a leather satchel. Ada dismounted and retrieved it. Inside were papers, bills of sale, shipping documents, and a letter in Bell's handwriting detailing the entire operation. Names, dates, amounts, everything they needed. "He must have dropped it in the storm," Eli said, careless. "Or Providence." Ada tucked the papers inside her coat. "This proves everything. The false theft, the frame-up, even Pike's cut of the profits. Now we just need to get it to someone who'll listen." They rode back as the sun climbed higher, burning off the storm's residue. Neither mentioned what had happened in the cave, but something had fundamentally shifted between them. The careful distance was gone, replaced by a partnership deeper than mere alliance. As Redemption Ridge came into view, they saw the gallows in the town square. 3 bodies swayed in the morning breeze. Ada's hands tightened on the reins. "We were too late." For them, not for the others. Eli's voice was hard. "Bell just made his last mistake. That satchel has enough evidence to hang him twice over. We get this to Marshal Cray and—" A shot cracked across the desert. Eli's horse screamed and went down. He rolled clear as more shots followed, striking the ground around them. "Ride." He slapped Ada's horse, sending it galloping toward town as he took cover behind his fallen mount. Ada looked back to see riders approaching fast Bell's men. Led by Deputy Reyes, Eli had his rifle out, laying down covering fire, but he was outnumbered 5-1. The satchel burned against her ribs. The evidence that could save the town, bring justice for Sarah and the executed men. All she had to do was ride hard for town. Hide it, get word to the marshal. Instead, she wheeled her horse around and charged back toward Eli. "What are you doing?" he shouted. "Not leaving you." She rode straight at the attackers, wild and unexpected. They scattered, their shots going wide. She reached Eli, hauled him up behind her as bullets whined past. "You're insane," he said, but his arm went tight around her waist as they galloped for town. They made it to the main street before Reyes caught up. He stood in their path, rifle raised. "End of the line. Schoolteacher, hand over what you took." Ada felt Eli shift behind her, knew he was calculating angles, preparing to sacrifice himself so she could escape. She couldn't let that happen. So she did the unexpected once more. She pulled the school bell from her saddlebag. She'd been carrying it since the fire, meaning to polish it, and hurled it at Reyes with all her strength. The heavy brass caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. His shot went wild, striking the water tower. As he stumbled, trying to regain his balance, Eli's gun cleared leather. But he didn't shoot to kill. The bullet struck Reyes's gun hand, sending his rifle spinning away. Even now, even in desperate circumstances, Eli kept his vow to never again shoot first to kill. The bell rolled to a stop in the dust, ringing with each revolution. The sound brought people from buildings, witnesses to what came next. Everyone saw that. Ada called out, loud and clear. "Deputy Reyes fired first. We defended ourselves. And I have here evidence that Horace Bell has been stealing cattle, framing innocent men, and murdering those who discovered his crimes." She held the satchel high, The crowd murmured, pressing closer. Bell's other men hesitated, unwilling to gun down a woman in front of witnesses. Lies Bell himself appeared, Pike beside him. That woman is delusional. Arrest them both. On what charges? Ruby Lark stepped from her saloon, shotgun cradled in her arms. Seems to me they were defending themselves against bushwhackers.
She's a thief,
Bell snarled.
She took my property.
This, Ada held up the satchel. With your signed confession inside, yes, I'd imagine you'd want this back. She looked at the crowd. Who wants to hear what Mr. Bell wrote about his cattle operation, about how he's been stealing from all of you? The crowd surged forward. Bell went for his gun, but froze as a dozen weapons appeared in the hands of townspeople. Not just Ruby, but ranchers who'd lost cattle. Merchants tired of Bell's stranglehold. Parents whose children Ada taught. I think, said Tom Morrison, Bell's own ranch hand. We'd all like to hear what's in those papers. Miss Ada. And there in the street, with 3 bodies still swaying in the square and the morning sun beating down, Ada read Horace Bell's own words aloud. His confession to systematic theft, his arrangement with Pike, the murder of Sarah Winters when she'd gotten too close. By the time she finished, Bell and Pike were surrounded by their former supporters, now turned captors.
You can't do this,
Pike blustered.
I'm the law.
Not anymore. Eli said quietly. He pulled out a badge Ada had never seen him wear. Eli Hart, Special Deputy UI's Marshal, temporarily retired. I'd say I'm coming out of retirement. The crowd cheered. Bell made one last desperate play, lunging for Ada, maybe thinking a hostage would save him. But she was ready. The bell was in her hand again, and this time her aim was perfect. It caught him square in the temple, dropping him like a sack of grain. I really need to have that bell mounted properly, she said conversationally. It's proving quite useful as a weapon. Later, after Bell and Pike were locked in their own jail and riders had been sent for the federal marshal, Ada stood with Eli in the schoolhouse. The gallows were being torn down outside, the bodies given proper burial. It couldn't undo the injustice, but it was a start. Special Deputy Marshal, she asked. Sam Cray deputized me years ago, never officially revoked it. Figured it might come in handy if I ever... He shrugged. If I ever found something worth fighting for again. And did you find something worth fighting for? He looked at her, and she saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke. Yes, I did. They stood close, not quite touching, aware of the open door and the townspeople milling outside. What had happened in the cave was private, precious, not for public display, but the connection hummed between them, stronger for being unspoken. What now? Ada asked. Now we rebuild, fair trials for Bell and Pike, restitution for the Mexican families, a real sheriff instead of a bought one. He paused. And a school that teaches justice as well as reading. And us. The question slipped out before she could stop it. His hand found hers, a brief squeeze hidden by their bodies. Whatever you want, Ada, whatever you need. I'm not going anywhere. She squeezed back, then stepped away to maintain propriety. But inside, where her carefully constructed walls had been, something new was growing. Not dependence or desperate need, but partnership, trust, maybe even love. Good, she said briskly. Because this bell needs proper mounting, and I believe you promised to finish those repairs. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his scarred face. Yes, ma'am. Happy to oblige. As he gathered his tools and she prepared for the students who would surely return tomorrow, Ada thought about worthiness and pride and the courage to ask for what you need. In a cave during a sandstorm, she'd let go of her armor and found not weakness but strength. Found that being worthy didn't mean being untouchable. The bell sang as Eli worked, its voice clear and true across the desert. A sound of ending and beginning, and of justice served and hope renewed. of a woman too proud to beg who'd learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply ask to be seen. Part 5. Fire on the schoolhouse roof. Ada woke to the acrid smell of smoke and the orange glow of flames dancing on her bedroom wall. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming of the Mexican camp burning. Then Ruby Lark's voice cut through the night. Fire the schoolhouse. Ada threw on her wrapper and boots, racing down the stairs and into the street. The schoolhouse roof was ablaze, flames reaching toward the star-filled sky like desperate fingers. Already, townspeople were forming a bucket brigade from the well, but the fire had too much of a head start. My books? Ada started toward the building, but strong hands caught her. Too dangerous. Eli's face was grim in the firelight. The roof's about to go. The children. Then she heard it, a thin wail from inside. Oh God, someone's in there. Before anyone could stop her, Ada broke free and plunged through the doorway. The heat hit her like a physical blow, smoke thick and choking. She dropped to her knees, crawling beneath the worst of it. Where are you? She called. Another cry from beneath the teacher's desk. She found young Tommy Morrison, the ranch hand's boy, curled in a ball and sobbing with terror. He'd been sleeping there. She realized. Another runaway from a harsh home. Come on, sweetheart. She pulled him against her chest. We're getting out. But when she turned back, a burning beam had fallen across the doorway. The windows were too high, too small. Smoke filled her lungs, making each breath agony. Tommy clung to her, his small body shaking. The bell. It still sat on her desk where Eli had been working on its mounting. She grabbed it with her free hand and hurled it through the window with all her strength. Glass shattered, and cool night air rushed in. Here, she screamed. We're here. An axe blade appeared through the wall, widening the hole. Eli's face appeared, streaked with soot and sweat. He reached through, and she pushed Tommy into his arms before following, tumbling into the street as the roof collapsed behind them in a shower of sparks. Tommy's mother appeared, weeping as she clutched her son. Ada sat in the dirt, coughing, watching her schoolhouse burn. All her books, the new supplies they'd just received, the students' work gone. This weren't no accident, someone muttered. Ada knew they were right. 3 nights after Bell and Pike's arrest, with federal marshals due any day, someone had sent a message. She forced herself to stand on shaking legs, surveying the crowd. Who was on watch? Eli asked quietly. Ben Stokes, but he's... Tom Morrison pointed to where Ben sat against a wall, head bleeding. Someone knocked him cold. Ada moved to examine Ben's wound. As she did, she noticed Deputy Reyes at the edge of the crowd. His hand was still bandaged from Eli's bullet, but he wore a satisfied smirk that made her stomach turn. Enjoying the show? Deputy, she asked. Terrible tragedy, he said smoothly. All those books, that bell you're so fond of throwing. Good thing the boy got out safe. Be a shame if next time someone got hurt worse. Is that a threat? Just an observation. Dangerous times. Smart folks might consider moving on. Eli stepped forward, but Ada caught his arm. Not here. Not with witnesses who might testify Reyes was provoked. The deputy tipped his hat mockingly and sauntered away. I'll kill him, Eli said quietly. No. Ada's voice was steel. We do this legally. We're better than them. Being better won't rebuild your school. No, but this community will. She was right. As dawn broke, wagons began arriving. The Delgado family brought boards salvaged from an old barn. Several ranchers contributed nails and tools. Even some of Bell's former hands showed up, awkward but determined to help. It ain't right, Tom Morrison said, hammer in hand. You saved my boy. Least I can do is help rebuild. They worked through the day, and Ada was touched to see her students working alongside their parents. Maria Delgado organized the younger children to sort salvageable items. Ben Avery and the older boys hauled water to ensure no embers remained. But as afternoon waned, Ada made a troubling discovery. She'd managed to save some partially burned papers from her desk, and among them was something that hadn't been there before. A note in block letters. "Next time the fire starts with you." She showed it to Eli quietly. His jaw tightened. "They're not done," he said. "Bell and Pike might be in jail, but they had Confederates, people who profited from the operation. Reyes. Among others, the question is how many and how desperate." That evening, while the skeleton of the new schoolhouse rose against the sunset, Ada called a town meeting in Ruby's saloon. The respectable women who normally wouldn't set foot in such an establishment sat beside the saloon girls. Ranchers shared benches with Mexican laborers. The fire had done what years of teaching couldn't united them in common cause. "They tried to scare us off," Ada began. "Burned our school, threatened our children. They think we'll run, that we'll give up the fight for justice because one building burned." "Maybe we should," someone called out. "If kids are going to get hurt." "Our children are already hurt," Senora Delgado stood, fierce as any warrior. "My husband's brother hanged for crimes he didn't commit. My daughter sleeping with nightmares. You think running makes that better?" "She's right," Ruby added. "We've lived in fear too long. Time to end it." Ada held up the ledger she'd taken to carrying it always now. "This book contains enough evidence to convict a dozen men. Bell and Pike were just the beginning, but I need your help to finish it." "What kind of help?" Tom Morrison asked. "Information. You've all seen things, heard things. Who visited Bell late at night who was paid off, who threatened you to keep quiet." She looked around the room. "Alone. Each piece means nothing. Together, they paint a picture." Slowly, tentatively, people began to speak. A rancher mentioned cattle that vanished without investigation. A merchant described being forced to pay protection to Pike. One of Ruby's girls whispered about influential men who'd visited Bell's ranch for private parties where deals were struck and laws were bent. Eli took notes, his expression growing darker with each revelation. The web of corruption spread wider than even Ada had imagined, reaching into the territorial capital itself. "There's something else." Old Ben Hoskins wheezed from the corner. "About Sarah Winters. She came to me week before she disappeared. Asked about the old Spanish mine up in Devil's Canyon. Said she'd found references in them papers. Thought that's where they was hiding evidence." Ada's pulse quickened. "What kind of evidence?" "Money, books, maybe even bodies. That mine goes deep. Lots of places to hide things." "That's where they took her horse," Eli said quietly. "Where I found it." A chill ran through the room. If Sarah's body was in that mine, along with evidence of other crimes. "We need to search it," Ada said. "Too dangerous," several voices protested. "Everything we've done has been dangerous." Ada stood straighter. "But we're not the same town that let Sarah Winters disappear. We're not the same people who looked away while innocent men hanged. We've already paid the price for our cowardice. Now it's time to pay the price for our courage." The meeting broke up with plans to organize a search party, but as people filed out, Reyes appeared in the doorway. Two hard-looking men flanking him. "Touching speech," he drawled. "But you might want to reconsider that mine expedition." "Still making threats, Deputy." Eli's hand rested on his gun. "Warnings. That mine's unstable. Dangerous. Would hate for there to be a cave-in with folks inside. Especially if you caused it," Ada said clearly. Reyes's smile was all teeth. "Accidents happen. Ask Sarah Winters." The admission, veiled as it was, sent a ripple through the remaining crowd. Several men stood, hands moving to weapons. The saloon crackled with tension. "Deputy Reyes," Ada said, her teacher's voice cutting through the murmur. "You just confessed to knowledge of Sarah Winters' murder in front of 30 witnesses. I'd think very carefully about your next move." His smile faltered. The men with him shifted nervously, realizing they were outnumbered. After a long moment, Reyes spat on the floor. "This ain't over, Schoolteacher." "No," she agreed. "It's not, but your part in it is, Ruby. Would you be so kind as to send someone for the federal marshals, tell them we have a confession to murder? Reyes went for his gun. The saloon erupted in motion, tables overturning, people diving for cover. But Eli was faster, his gun clearing leather with the fluid grace of long practice. His bullet struck Reyes's gun, sending it spinning away for the second time. "I keep telling you," Eli said calmly, gun still trained on the deputy. "I don't shoot to kill anymore, but you're testing my resolve." Reyes clutched his twice-injured hand, face contorted with pain and rage. His companions had their hands up, unwilling to face a room full of armed townspeople. "Take them to the jail," Ada instructed. "And this time, we'll post guards who won't be so easily knocked unconscious." As the men were marched out, she felt the shift in the room's energy. They'd faced down their fear, stood together against the threats. The fire had been meant to break them. Instead, it had forged them into something stronger. Later, as the moon rose over the partially rebuilt schoolhouse, Ada stood with Eli examining the damage by lamplight. The new structure would be smaller but sturdier, built by the community instead of grudging taxation. "They'll come at us again," Eli warned. "Reyes has friends, and there's still money hidden somewhere. Desperate men do desperate things." "Then we'd better find that mine before they do." She touched the salvaged bell, its surface now scarred by fire, but still intact. "Sarah died trying to expose them. We owe her the truth." "We owe her justice," Eli corrected. "Truth is just the first step." Ada studied him in the lamplight. "You've changed. When we first met, you wouldn't even stay to see the outcome of that saloon fight. You changed me." He stepped closer, reminded me why I became a lawman in the first place. Not for the badge or the bounty, but to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. "I didn't do that. You chose—" "Ada," he touched her face gently. "Take the compliment. You're allowed to be proud of what you've accomplished here." She leaned into his touch, allowing herself this moment of vulnerability. "I am proud, but I'm also terrified. What if we search that mine and find nothing? What if we find everything?" he countered. "What if tomorrow we uncover enough evidence to clean out every corrupt official from here to Santa Fe? Then we'd better get some sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day." He walked her back to the boarding house, both of them aware of the eyes watching from shadows. Let them watch, Ada thought. Let them see that burning buildings and threatening letters wouldn't drive her away. She'd come to Redemption Ridge seeking a fresh start. Now she was determined to give the whole town one. At her door, Eli paused. "That was quick thinking with the bell, though I'm starting to wonder if you should just wear it on a chain. Seems to be your weapon of choice." She smiled. "Perhaps I'll start a new fashion trend. Armed schoolteachers." "God help the outlaws." His expression grew serious. "Lock your door tonight. Keep the gun I gave you close." "I will, and Eli." She caught his hand. "Thank you for pulling us out, for standing with me, for everything." He squeezed her fingers gently. "Partners, remember." As she prepared for bed, Ada reflected on the day's events. A school burned, a community united, criminals exposed, and tomorrow they'd search for the truth in a dead mine where Sarah Winters might have breathed her last. She checked the load in the pistol Eli had given her, tested the lock on her door, and settled down with the salvaged papers from her desk. Most were ruined, but a few pages remained readable. Student essays about their hopes and dreams. Maria Delgado wanted to be a teacher. Ben Avery dreamed of raising horses. Tommy Morrison just wanted to feel safe. Simple dreams, but in a town like Redemption Ridge, even simple dreams required courage. Tomorrow, she'd lead a search party into Devil's Canyon. Tonight, she'd plan lessons for the students who'd surely return despite the fire, despite the danger. Because that's what teachers did. They built hope from ashes, one lesson at a time. Outside her window, she could see the skeletal frame of the new schoolhouse rising against the stars. By the time the federal marshals arrived, They'd have more than just Belle's satchel. They'd have Reyes's confession, witness testimonies, and, God willing, whatever secrets lay buried in an abandoned mine. The fire had been meant to end their resistance. Instead, it had lit a beacon that would burn until justice was done. And at the center of it all, a brass bell scarred by flames, but still ready to ring a symbol that some things endure. Some voices can't be silenced, and some teachers are too stubborn to know when they're beaten. Tomorrow would bring danger, but tonight, Redemption Ridge slept a little easier, knowing that someone was willing to stand watch against the darkness. Part 6, Flash Flood and the Night Herd. The morning dawned heavy and strange, with clouds piling up against the mountains like gray wool. Ada had never seen rain clouds in New Mexico quite like these, dark and swollen, with an electric quality that made the horses skittish. "Storm's coming," Ben Hoskins said, squinting at the sky as their search party assembled. "Big one. Maybe we should postpone." "No." Ada checked her saddlebags one more time. They'd gathered 15 volunteers, all armed, all determined to search the old Spanish mine. "Reyes's friends won't wait for good weather. Neither can we." Eli rode up beside her, his own mount dancing nervously. Behind him came Tom Morrison, Jake Holloway, whose cattle had mysteriously vanished last spring, and, surprisingly, 3 of Belle's former ranch hands led by a grizzled cowboy named Walt Tanner. "Why are you here?" Ada asked Walt directly. "Been working for Belle near 10 years, the older man said. "Thought I knew him. Turns out I was just another fool he was using. My nephew was one of them boys they hanged." He spat tobacco juice. "I aim to see justice done." The ride to Devil's Canyon took 2 hours through increasingly broken country. The clouds followed them, growing darker, pressing lower until it felt like riding through a tunnel. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the air smelled of copper and sage. "Don't like this," Eli muttered, studying the canyon walls as they entered. "Flash flood country. These arroyos can fill in minutes." But they pressed on, following Ben's directions to the old mine. They found it halfway up the canyon wall, a black mouth in the red rock, partially collapsed but passable. More disturbing were the fresh tracks around the entrance. "Someone's been here," Tom observed. "Recent, too." They dismounted, and Eli took point as they entered the mine. The temperature dropped immediately, and their lanterns threw dancing shadows on rough-hewn walls. The main shaft ran straight back before branching into multiple tunnels. "Split up," someone suggested. "Never split up," Eli said firmly. "That's how people disappear." They moved deeper as a group, the silence broken only by dripping water and their own breathing. 50 yards in, they found the first evidence, a stack of wooden crates marked with Belle's brand. Ada pried one open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were ledgers. Not just ranch records, but detailed accounts of bribes, murders, and thefts going back 15 years. Names, dates, amounts, a complete record of corruption. "Mother of God," Walt breathed. "He documented everything." "Arrogant men often do," Ada said. "They never believe they'll be caught." Thunder crashed overhead, so loud the mine dust shifted. Then they heard something else, voices, coming from the entrance. "Company," Eli hissed. "Everybody back. Lights out." They retreated deeper into the mine, extinguishing lanterns in the darkness. Ada felt Eli's hand find hers, steady and reassuring. The voices grew closer, at least 6 men, maybe more. "No, they're here. Horses outside." "Then we end this. Cave in the entrance. Claim it was an accident." Ada recognized the voice Samuel Crow, territorial inspector, one of the names in Belle's ledger. Her blood ran cold. They weren't just planning to trap them. They were planning mass murder. Eli squeezed her hand, then let go. She heard him moving in the darkness, positioning himself. The other men shifted too, preparing for a fight in the pitch black of a mine shaft. Not good odds. Then the rain started. It began as a distant roar, like a train approaching. The men at the entrance paused, uncertain. The roar grew louder, and suddenly someone screamed. "Flash flood, get to high ground." Chaos erupted. The would-be killers fled, their shouts drowned by the incredible sound of water rushing through the canyon. In the mine, they felt it as vibration through the rock, then as actual water bursting through cracks in the walls. "Everybody out!" Eli shouted. "Now!" They ran, stumbling through darkness as water rose around their ankles, then knees. Ada clutched the precious ledgers to her chest, struggling to keep up. Behind them, support timbers groaned and cracked. They burst from the mine to find the canyon transformed. What had been a dry wash was now a raging river, brown water carrying trees, rocks, and debris. Their horses were gone hopefully to higher ground. The men who'd come to kill them were scattered on the opposite wall, trapped like everyone else. "Up!" Eli pointed to a ledge above the mine. "Climb!" They scrambled up the steep slope as water rose with terrifying speed. Ada's boots slipped on wet rock. She felt herself falling backward toward the torrent when strong hands caught her Walt and Tom, hauling her to safety. They huddled on the ledge searchers and would-be killers separated by 30 feet of raging water. For now, survival trumped conflict. The rain continued, torrential, turning the world into a gray cascade. "Look," Maria Delgado's father pointed upstream. A massive wall of water approached, carrying what looked like half a forest. When it hit, the mine entrance simply disappeared, sealed by tons of debris, if they'd been inside. "There!" Jake shouted over the storm. Below them, clinging to a rapidly shrinking rock, was a small figure. A child from the sheep camps upstream. Ada realized, caught by the flood and carried down. Without thinking, she started down the slope. "Are you insane?" someone yelled. Maybe, but she couldn't watch a child drown. She half slid, half fell to a lower ledge, then another, until she was just above the water. The child, a girl, maybe 7, reached desperately toward her. Ada lay flat, extending her arms. Too short, the water rose higher, and the girl's grip was failing. Ada made a choice. She swung her legs over, holding onto the ledge with one hand, reaching with the other. Her fingers brushed the child's. Then the rock the girl clung to rolled over. Ada lunged, catching small hands just as they disappeared under brown water. The current tried to tear the child away, nearly pulling Ada in two. Her shoulder screamed, her grip on the ledge weakening. Rope fell beside her. She looked up to see Eli rappelling down, Tom and others anchoring him from above. He reached them just as Ada's strength failed, wrapping one arm around her waist and the other around the child. "Pull!" he shouted. Inch by agonizing inch, they were hauled up through mud and rain. When they finally reached the ledge, Ada collapsed, still clutching the girl who coughed up water but lived. "You magnificent fool," Eli said roughly, holding them both. The rain began to slacken as suddenly as it had started. The flood continued to roar, but its level stabilized. Across the canyon, Crow and his men watched them with hollow eyes. The hunter had become the trapped, and everyone knew it. "Inspector Crow," Ada called across the water, her teacher's voice carrying clearly. "We found Bell's records. Every bribe you took, every crime you covered up. It's all here." Crow's face went ashen. One of his men made as if to draw, but Crow stopped him. What was the point? They were witnesses now, both sides, to attempted murder and actual heroism. "It's over," Eli added. "Federal marshals are already coming. You can run when this water drops, but wear your names, your crimes, it's all documented." As if in response, they heard horses. Up on the canyon rim, riders appeared led by Ruby Lark of all people, who'd organized a rescue party when the storm hit. Ropes dropped down, one by one. Both groups were hauled to safety. Crow and his men were disarmed and bound, looking defeated. The ledgers were waterlogged but readable. And the child, little Anna from the shepherd camp, clung to Ada like she'd never let go. You saved her. Anna's mother wept when they returned to town. You risked everything to save my baby. Word spread quickly. The schoolteacher who'd faced down corrupt officials had also plunged into floodwaters to save a child. The ledgers revealed a web of corruption reaching to the territorial capital, and the federal marshals, when they arrived, found a town ready to testify, to stand up, to demand justice. But that evening, as Ada sat in Ruby's kitchen letting the older woman tend her bruised shoulder, the weight of it all hit her. She'd nearly died today, multiple times. Having second thoughts? Ruby asked gently. No, just processing. Ada winced as Ruby applied liniment. A month ago, my biggest worry was broken desks and low attendance. Now I'm pulling children from floods and finding evidence of murder. Life comes at you fast out here. Ruby agreed. Question is, what do you do with it? Before Ada could answer, Eli appeared in the doorway. He'd cleaned up, but she could see the strain in his eyes. How's the shoulder? Sore but functional. She studied him. You saved us today, again. You saved yourself. And that little girl? I just provided backup. He sat across from her. Ada, what you did today, it was brave and foolish and completely you. Is that a compliment? It's a fact. His voice softened. When I saw you going over that ledge, I thought my heart would stop. I've lost people before. I can't... He stopped, jaw working. Ruby tactfully found urgent business elsewhere, leaving them alone. You can't what? Ada prompted gently. I can't lose you. The words came out rough, almost angry. I know we've only known each other weeks, but you've become necessary. To this town, to me. Ada reached across the table, taking his hand. I'm not going anywhere. Eli, we have a school to rebuild, criminals to prosecute, children to teach. And after that? After that, she squeezed his fingers. We'll see what else needs doing. Together. He brought her hand to his lips, a gesture so tender it made her chest tight. They sat like that, connected by more than touch, as evening painted the kitchen gold. Outside, Redemption Ridge buzzed with activity. The flood had receded, leaving mud and debris but also clarity. The corrupt were in chains, the evidence was safe, and tomorrow, federal justice would begin cleaning house. But tonight, Ada Miller sat in a warm kitchen, hand in hand with a man who'd once sworn off caring, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years' peace. Not the peace of safety that might never fully come, but the peace of purpose fulfilled. She'd come west seeking a fresh start. Instead, she'd found a mission, a community, and possibly love. The ledgers drying by the stove represented years of injustice that would finally see light. The child sleeping in the next room, wrapped in blankets, represented hope saved from drowning. And the scarred hand holding hers represented something else entirely, a future neither of them had expected but both were beginning to want. Stay for supper? She asked. Try to make me leave, he replied. So they stayed, while outside the stars emerged over a town washed clean by storm and courage. Tomorrow would bring trials and testimony, justice and rebuilding. But tonight, there was warmth and quiet companionship, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest adventures came from simply refusing to give up. The bell that twice fired, waterlogged brass bell sat on Ruby's mantel, dented but unbroken. Tomorrow it would ring over a new school, calling children to learn. Tonight, it stood silent witness to all they'd survived and all they'd yet to build. Part 7, Box Canyon Showdown. The federal marshals had been in town for 3 days, taking testimony and building cases. But on the 4th morning, they found their star witnesses missing. Bell and Pike had vanished from the jail, leaving behind 2 unconscious guards and a hole in the wall where the bars had been pried apart. Inside help, Marshal Sam Cray said grimly. Examining the scene, someone with access to tools and knowledge of when the guards changed shifts. Ada felt her stomach sink. They'd been so close to justice, and now the two masterminds were free. Worse, Reyes had disappeared the same night, though his cells showed no signs of tampering. They'll run for Mexico, someone suggested. No. Eli studied the tracks outside the jail. Too many horses, too heavily loaded. They're moving something besides themselves. The money, Ada realized. All those years of stolen cattle, bribes, extortion, there must be a fortune hidden somewhere. Eli nodded. And they're going to collect it before they run. Question is where? The answer came from an unexpected source. Walt Tanner, Bell's former hand, remembered something. Box Canyon. Bell always kept it off limits. Said the spring was bad, but I saw him heading there once with pack horses, late at night. Box Canyon's a death trap. Tom Morrison said, one way in, sheer walls, if they're holed up there. Then we need to move fast, Marshal Cray decided, before they finish packing and scatter to the winds. Within an hour, a posse had formed. Ada insisted on joining, despite Eli's protests. You're a schoolteacher, not a gunfighter, he argued. I'm a witness, she countered. And I'm the one who can identify all the ledger entries. We need this to end. Eli, properly, legally. He knew that look in her eyes, the one that said arguing was pointless. Fine, but you stay back when the shooting starts. When has she ever stayed back? Ruby asked dryly, checking the loads in her shotgun. She was coming too, along with most of the able-bodied townspeople who'd suffered under Bell's rule. They rode out as the sun reached its zenith, nearly 30 strong. Ada had strapped the school bell to her saddle partially as a good luck charm, partially because it had proven surprisingly useful as both weapon and signal. The entrance to Box Canyon was as narrow as described, barely wide enough for 2 horses abreast. The walls rose sheer on both sides, red rock banded with white, creating a natural fortress. As they approached, Eli raised his hand for silence. Fresh tracks, he said quietly. A lot of them. They're in there. Marshal Cray took charge. Tom, Jake, take 5 men and scale the north wall. See if you can get a firing position above. Walt, you know this place. Is there any other way out? None that a horse could take. Maybe a man could climb out the back, but it'd be rough going. Then we have them bottled. Cray looked at the narrow entrance. Question is, how many guns are waiting in there? They got their answer quickly. A shot rang out, striking the rock near Cray's head. Then Bell's voice echoed from the canyon. That's far enough. Marshal, unless you want to see how many of you we can drop before you reach cover. Horace Bell, Cray called back. You're under federal arrest for murder, theft, and corruption. Come out with your hands up. Laughter bounced off the canyon walls. I think not. We've got supplies, water, and enough ammunition to hold off an army. You want to waste your people's lives for a schoolmarm's crusade? This isn't about me, Ada called out before anyone could stop her. It's about Sarah Winters, and 3 innocent men you hanged, and years of bleeding this town dry. Ah, the infamous Miss Miller. Bell's voice turned mocking. Still playing the righteous crusader, tell me, was it worth it your schools burned? You've made enemies throughout the territory, and for what justice? There is no justice out here, only the strong and the weak. You're wrong, Ada said clearly. You're the weak one. Bell, so weak you had to steal and murder to feel powerful. So weak you're hiding in a hole instead of facing what you've done. Another shot, closer this time. Pike's voice now. Enough talk, clear out, or we start shooting to kill. But while they'd been talking, Tom Morrison and his climbers had reached the canyon rim. Ada saw them signaling they had a clear view of the defenders' positions. She caught Eli's eye and touched the bell on her saddle. He understood immediately. Get ready, he murmured to those nearby. Ada untied the bell and held it high. You want to know what I've learned out here? Belle, I've learned that sometimes the answer to darkness isn't more darkness. It's making enough noise that everyone has to pay attention. She spurred her horse forward and hurled the bell into the canyon with all her strength. It hit the rock wall and began rolling, its bronze voice ringing out with each impact, the sound amplified and echoed by the narrow walls until it was deafening. The defenders, startled by the cacophony, broke cover to see what was happening. That's when Tom's men opened fire from above, not to kill but to pin them down. The main posse charged through the entrance, using the confusion to reach defensive positions. What followed was chaos, but controlled chaos. Marshal Cray had been clear they wanted these men alive to stand trial. Eli's influence showed too. Shots were aimed to disarm and discourage, not kill. Ada stayed back as promised, but she wasn't idle. She'd brought writing materials and was documenting everything she could see: positions, participants, anything that might be needed for testimony. This would end properly, with evidence and law, not frontier justice. The bell had come to rest near Pike's position, still vibrating with residual sound. He made the mistake of kicking it aside, exposing himself. 3 shots from different directions struck near him, driving him into the open where Walt Tanner tackled him to the ground. That's for my nephew. You murdering dog! Bell held out longer, barricaded behind some fallen rocks with Reyes and 2 other men, but their position was untenable, surrounded, outgunned, with no escape route. Give it up! Horace, Ruby called out. Your money won't spend in prison. Better than hanging, he shouted back. Nobody's hanging today. Marshal Cray announced, You'll get a fair trial, which is more than you gave others. But this ends now, one way or another. A tense standoff developed. Ada could see Bell weighing his options, calculating odds. Then little Anna's voice piped up. The child Ada had saved from the flood had insisted on coming to see justice done. You're the bad man who burned our houses. Something about that small, accusing voice seemed to deflate Bell's resistance. Or perhaps he finally realized that the entire town had turned out against him: men, women, even children who'd suffered under his rule. If we surrender, he called, what guarantee do we have? My word as a federal marshal. Cray replied, and the word of every witness here, you'll make it to trial alive. Slowly, Bell emerged, hands raised. Reyes followed, his face sullen. The other 2 men threw down their weapons. As they were being bound, Ada noticed something: saddlebags, dozens of them, packed and ready for flight. The treasury of crime, she murmured. But when they opened the bags, they found more than money. Documents, photographs, letters. Bell had kept blackmail material on half the territory's powerful men. No wonder he'd felt untouchable. This is bigger than we thought, Cray said quietly, examining the papers. This is going to bring down people all the way to Santa Fe. Good, Ada said firmly. Let it all come to light. As they prepared to transport the prisoners back to town, Bell caught Ada's eye. You've won this round, schoolteacher, but you've made enemies you can't imagine. They'll come for you, long after I'm gone. Maybe, Ada acknowledged, but I'll be ready, and I won't be alone. She gestured to the townspeople around her: former enemies now united, weak individuals made strong by community. Bell had ruled through fear and division. She'd countered with education and unity. The ride back to Redemption Ridge took on an almost festive atmosphere. Justice had been served without unnecessary bloodshed. The stolen money would be returned to its rightful owners where possible, used for town improvements where not, and the blackmail documents would be turned over to federal authorities, likely triggering investigations throughout the territory. As they entered the main street, Ada saw her students waiting at the partially rebuilt schoolhouse. They cheered when they spotted her, running alongside the horses. Maria Delgado held up a slate with justice, written in careful letters. Look, Eli said quietly, riding beside her. Your real victory. He was right. Bell and Pike in chains meant immediate justice, but those children represented lasting change. They'd learned that standing up to wrongdoing was possible, that community was stronger than corruption, that education was the best weapon against tyranny. That evening, as statements were taken and evidence catalogued, Ada found herself at the schoolhouse with Eli. They sat on the new steps, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. "So what now?" Eli asked. "The bad men are caught. The town is free. Will you stay?" "Where else would I go?" Ada smiled. "I have a school to finish rebuilding, students to teach, a community to serve." "And us?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Ada considered her words carefully. "I came here running from a failed marriage, convinced I needed nobody but myself. I was wrong." She turned to face him fully. "I need you, Eli Hart, not to protect me or complete me, but to stand beside me, to be my partner in whatever comes next." He was quiet for a long moment, and she saw him wrestling with his own demons, the guilt over Colorado, the years of self-imposed isolation, the fear of caring too much again. "I'm not an easy man to live with," he said finally. "I have nightmares. I go quiet for days. I've got more scars than just the visible ones. And I'm a stubborn, prideful woman who throws bells at people and runs into burning buildings." She took his hand. "We're quite a pair." "Yes," he said simply. "We are." As if in agreement, the bell retrieved from Box Canyon and waiting to be remounted caught the evening breeze and chimed softly. Tomorrow it would ring out over Redemption Ridge, calling children to learn and grow. But tonight, it seemed to be blessing new beginnings. "There's going to be a trial," Ada said. "Probably several. They'll need witnesses, testimony. It could take months." "Then it's good I'm not going anywhere." Eli squeezed her hand. "Besides, someone needs to finish fixing that schoolhouse roof. Can't have the teacher getting rained on." They sat together as stars emerged in the darkening sky. In the jail, Bell and Pike awaited federal justice. In homes throughout the town, people slept easier knowing the shadow of corruption had lifted. And in the morning, children would gather to learn reading, writing, arithmetic, and the most important lesson of all that ordinary people, standing together, could accomplish extraordinary things. The bell would ring, as it always had. But now it would ring over a town redeemed not by its name, but by its actions. A town where a prideful schoolteacher and a scarred ex-lawman had found each other, found purpose, and found that sometimes the greatest courage was simply refusing to give up. Justice had come to Redemption Ridge, wearing a schoolmarm's dress and carrying a brass bell, and it was just the beginning. New bell on the schoolhouse porch. 6 months had passed since the showdown at Box Canyon. The trials in Santa Fe had sent shockwaves through the territory. 12 officials indicted, 3 judges removed from office, and a complete overhaul of the territorial marshal system. Bell got 20 years, Pike 15. Reyes turned state's evidence for a reduced sentence, his testimony crucial in unraveling the wider web of corruption. Ada stood in her newly completed schoolhouse, sunlight streaming through windows that actually had glass. The building was larger than before, with a proper library corner and even a small room for science demonstrations. The community had built it together, each board and nail a testament to their shared commitment to the future. Miss Ada Maria Delgado burst through the door. "They're here, the new families." Ada smoothed her skirts and stepped onto the porch. 3 wagons rolled into town, carrying families who'd heard that Redemption Ridge was hiring a new sheriff, a doctor, a telegraph operator. The town was growing, healing, becoming what it should have always been. Among the newcomers, she spotted a familiar face, her sister Charlotte from Boston, accompanied by her husband and 2 children. "Charlotte!" Ada rushed down the steps, hardly believing her eyes. "Surprise!" Charlotte embraced her warmly. "Your letters made this place sound so exciting. We had to come see for ourselves. Besides, Thomas got an offer to open a bank here, a real one, not like those loan shark operations you wrote about." As Ada helped them unload, she marveled at how much had changed. The woman who'd fled Boston in disgrace was now a respected figure whose work had helped clean up an entire territory. The town that had once cowered under Bell's rule now bustled with honest commerce and hope.
Miss Miller.
Young Tommy Morrison ran up, no longer the frightened child who'd hidden under her desk during the fire.
Pa says to tell you the new bell arrived.
The new bell commissioned with some of the recovered money, inscribed with the names of all who'd died for justice, including Sarah Winters. The old bell, her faithful weapon and alarm, would be retired to a place of honor in the school. That evening, the town gathered for the bell-raising ceremony. Eli had built a sturdy tower for it, his craftsmanship evident in every joint and beam. As they watched Walt Tanner and Tom Morrison hoist it into place, Ada felt Eli's hand slip into hers. "Nervous?" he asked quietly.
About the ceremony, no.
About what comes after. She squeezed his fingers. They'd been courting properly for months now, to the delight of Ruby Lark and the gossiping church ladies. But tonight, after the ceremony, Eli planned to make a formal proposal. The whole town knew it. He'd accidentally asked 3 different people for advice on ring selection. The bells settled into place with a satisfying thunk. Mayor Morrison Tom had been elected in the first free election, stepped forward to speak, but Ada raised her hand. "Before we begin," she said, "there's something that needs saying." She looked out at the crowd. Mexican families mixed freely with Anglo. Former enemies, now neighbors. Children who'd learned that justice was possible if you fought for it. 8 months ago, I arrived here a stranger, carrying my own failures and fears. I found a town shadowed by corruption, where good people had given up hope, where speaking truth was dangerous and teaching equality was radical. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. But I also found courage in Ruby Lark, who sheltered those who needed it, in the Delgado family, who never stopped believing in education, in Walt Tanner, who chose justice over comfortable blindness, in every person who stood up when standing was dangerous. She paused, finding Eli's eyes in the crowd. I found a partner who remembered how to fight for right instead of just surviving. I found students hungry to learn not just letters and numbers, but how to be citizens of conscience. I found a community that, when tested, chose hard truth over easy lies. "And we found you," Senora Delgado called out. "A teacher who ran into fire for our children." "Who threw bells at outlaws?" someone else added, to general laughter. Ada smiled. "Yes, well, sometimes unconventional methods are required. But here's what matters. We found each other. We discovered that together, we're stronger than any corruption, braver than any threat, more enduring than any injustice." She nodded to Tommy Morrison, who grasped the bell rope. "This bell will ring for our children and their children. It will call them to learn, to think, to question, to stand up for what's right. It will remind us that silence in the face of evil is complicity, but that one voice joined by another, then another can shake the foundations of tyranny." "Ring it, Tommy," she said softly. The boy pulled, and the new bell's voice rang out clear and strong across Redemption Ridge. But it wasn't alone from the schoolhouse. The old bell chimed in harmony, Ruby having snuck in to ring it. Then the church bell joined, and the dinner triangle from the boarding house, and even some cowboys firing their guns in the air safely. Eli made sure. The cacophony was glorious, a joyful noise that said, "We are here. We survived. We're building something better." As the sounds died away, and people began dispersing to the dance Ruby had organized, Eli appeared at Ada's elbow. "That was beautiful," he said. "The speech. You. Always you." He glanced around, noticed they were relatively alone. "Ada, I had this whole thing planned for later, but—" "Eli Hart, don't you dare propose to me without proper witnesses," Ruby called out. "We've been waiting months for this." Suddenly they were surrounded, the entire town, it seemed, forming a circle around them. Charlotte stood with tears in her eyes. Eli's friends Ben and Jake grinning like fools, the students giggling behind their hands. Eli looked at Ada helplessly. So much for romantic privacy. Since when have we done anything privately? Ada laughed. Go on then, but I warn you, I'm still too proud to beg. I wouldn't want you to. He dropped to one knee, pulling out a simple gold band set with a small turquoise stone. Ada Miller, you've turned my life upside down. You've made me remember why fighting for justice matters. You've shown me that caring isn't weakness and that partnership makes us both stronger. You're stubborn, principled, throw bells at people, and I can't imagine living without you. Will you marry me? Well, Ada pretended to consider, though her eyes were bright with tears. I suppose someone needs to make sure you finish all those repairs properly. Is that a yes? Yes, Eli Hart, that's a yes. The crowd erupted in cheers as he slipped the ring on her finger and stood to kiss her. It was thoroughly improper and absolutely perfect. The old Ada would have been mortified by such public display. The new Ada, the one forged by fire and flood. Corruption and courage didn't care who saw her happiness. About time, Ruby shouted. Now can we have the dance? The celebration lasted until dawn. Ada danced with Eli, with her students, with cowboys and shopkeepers and everyone in between. She watched Maria Delgado teach Charlotte's children Spanish words, saw Walt Tanner courting the new schoolteacher from the next town over, observed the easy mixing of people who'd once been separated by prejudice and fear. No regrets, Eli asked during a quiet moment, his arms around her as they swayed to the fiddle music. About what? Leaving your comfortable life back east for all this trouble? Ada looked around at their adopted town, at the people who'd become family, at the man who'd become her partner in every sense. I didn't leave a comfortable life, she said. I left a constrained one. Here, I found freedom, purpose, love. She smiled up at him. And really, what's a little gunfire and corruption between friends? He laughed, spinning her around. Most people prefer their courtships without death threats. We're not most people. No, he agreed, pulling her close. We're definitely not. As the first rays of sunlight painted the desert gold, the celebration finally wound down. Ada and Eli walked to the schoolhouse, where the old bell hung in its place of honor. She touched it gently, remembering all the times it had served her weapon, alarm, symbol of resistance. What are you thinking? Eli asked. That every ending is also a beginning. She turned to him. We've won this battle, but you know there will be others. There's still injustice, still those who prey on the weak, still children who need education and communities that need courage. I know. He drew her close. Good thing we're not going anywhere. Good thing indeed. The new bell caught the morning breeze, chiming softly. Soon, children would arrive for lessons. Life would go on, but it would be a life built on truth, not fear. A life where Mexican children learned alongside Anglo, where women's voices mattered, where justice wasn't just a word but a daily practice. Ada Miller had come to Redemption Ridge as a runaway. Fleeing shame and failure, she would stay as Mrs. Ada Hart teacher, fighter, bell thrower, and proof that sometimes the greatest redemption comes not from forgetting the past, but from building a better future. The schoolhouse door stood open, ready for a new day. The bell tower rose against the desert sky, a promise and a challenge. And in the doorway stood a woman too proud to beg, who'd learned that real pride came from standing up, speaking out, and never backing down from a righteous fight. Come on, she said to Eli, taking his hand. We've got work to do. He smiled, following her into the school. Lead the way. Schoolmarm, I'm right behind you. Partners, she corrected. Always, he agreed. And together, they walked into their future, a future bright with possibility, shaped by courage and ringing with the clear voice of justice across the desert lands. The end. Thank you all for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying this tale, whether you're listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps under the stars like our characters in the Old West. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Night. Give this video a thumbs up and hit that hype button so more people can discover these tales of courage and redemption. Until next time, partners.